The Passat B7 seems like an interesting car to many. It seems to be noticeably better than the previous B6, but not as expensive as the next B8, whose sales turned out to be generally miserable. This is partly true, but B7 is much more controversial than it seems. Someone sold it and crossed himself, and someone considers it the best sedan for sane money. That is, he is equally often praised and scolded. For what exactly, now we'll figure it out. History of technology. The Passat B7 was first shown at the Paris Motor Show in 2010. However, the Germans turned out to be honest guys and did not call this generation new, they called it updated. And this is absolutely true, because the B7 is just a B6 brought to mind. At the same time, he received a new appearance. Both the optics, the body panels, and the interior have changed. Despite the fact that it is built on the PQ46 platform, the same as the previous B6, some details of the chassis and base have changed, and the interior equipment is especially noticeable. But the motors and gearboxes remained the same. Gasoline engines here are the EA111, EA888, and EA390 series. Diesel engines are the EA189 series. Of course, the most popular engine we had was the 1.8 TSI EA888 series with a capacity of 152 horsepower, and second place was the 1.4 TSI EA111 series. These motors are both a headache for car owners and a reason for pride. Below they will talk about these units themselves. Unfortunately, there were no classic torque converter machines on the B7. All two-pedal cars were with SG robots, a dry 7-speed DQ200 or 6-speed DQ250 with an oil bath clutch. The drive could be both front and full with a Haldex clutch. There is nothing particularly interesting in the suspensions. There is McPherson strut in front and a multi-link in the back. Since the Passat B7 was built on an already quite old platform, it could not hold out on the assembly line for a long time. In 2015, it was replaced by the next generation, based on the then new MQB platform. That's good, but let's get back to Q7. Why was he loved and hated? And still love and hate? Hate number 5, pendant. In short, the main claim sounds like this: oh, pendant. If not briefly, then everything is a little more complicated. The fact is that the Passat's suspension, especially the rear, is not very well tuned for bad roads. Residents of regions where the roads are good, Ried, Moscow, are generally satisfied with everything. Shaking does not pester them, they do not know breakdowns, and the B7 has good handling with these suspensions. But as soon as the owner of the car pulls out onto an ordinary Russian road, the rhetoric begins to change about the smoothness of the suspension and the softness of the ride. This is not about her. It is made knocked down, harsh, especially on bad roads. It behaves well on a flat road, but as soon as you leave on a slightly broken road, the fun begins. For some reason, the car jumps and does not swallow bumps, plus incomprehensible sounds during the operation of the suspension, although the suspension is in perfect condition. Yes, complaints about the noise of the rear suspension are also common. At the same time, the resource of all its elements is quite high, and most often it is necessary to change only the stabilizer struts. The rest turned out, albeit not quite comfortable, but durable. And on good roads, the Passat behaves well. Unfortunately, we don't have many such roads. Love number 5, ergonomics and interior materials. Surprisingly, very high-quality materials were used in a not very expensive car. Many note that by a run of 100,000 kilometers, where was almost not noticeable. Maximum, the steering will begin to shine. Therefore, many write, the quality of the materials is excellent. It is a fact. One of the owners in the recall recalled how quickly his Doberman was able to fuck up the interior of the previous Japanese car, but he could not cope with the plastic of the Passat. This is good. Everything turned out well in terms of ergonomics. Here I'll just give a couple of quotes. Many people scold the Passat for being boring, but I like this kind of boringness. I got into the car and seem to have been driving it all my life. Everything is pleasing to the eye, and also pleasant to the touch. Everything is somehow always at hand and in its place. The only drawback, according to many, is the electric mirror control joystick, which is not very convenient to use. However, you can get used to it. And, of course, the fact that in rich trim levels it was possible to order a rather rich interior, which could award the Passat with a share of premium, pleases. Some were particularly pleased with the leather. The combination of leather and Alcantara gives a comfortable perception both in winter and in summer. And everything with the interior would be perfect, if not for one detail. Hate number 4, creaking in the cabin. It's a shame, but a comfortable and at first glance high-quality interior disappointed Volkswagen owners with a large number of squeaks. It is difficult to precisely localize the source of extraneous sounds, and many had to disassemble the entire panel. Inside, everything is Volkswagen-worthy. Everything is spoiled only by a nasty cheap plastic insert in the center of the entire panel. On a more expensive configuration it is metal. She, apparently, breeds crickets. I'm trying to kill them, so far unsuccessfully. The tunnel of the central air duct creaks. The salon is especially annoying with obscene sounds in winter. What I didn't like was the terrible creaking of the dashboard at low temperatures. After warming up, he disappeared, but got to the cold. Given that the car has good sound insulation, the candles in the cabin simply exhausted the soul for many. Although some treated them more simply, I'm already used to crickets in the panel and chips on the glass. I'll replace the glass when selling it at a whole, but let the crickets live. They are already like family to me. Love number 4, economy. The economy of the Tradewinds with 1.4 TSI engines, of course, is exaggerated by many. They can write like this: with all the sufficient dynamics, the car is very economical. In the city no more than 10 with traffic jams. On the highway you can easily meet 4 to 5. To be honest, it is difficult, even impossible, to meet these numbers easily. The following review is more plausible. On the highway it is fabulous. I fit into 6.5 to 7 on the highway, while not denying myself anything. In economy mode on the highway it's really possible to bring it up to 5.5 to 6 liters per 100, but this is too much of an option. In the city's July 5th, 10 liters 100 for me. It really depends on the amount of braking in traffic jams. Consumption with a 1.8 TSI engine is also not too high, but with a diesel engine it is really fabulous. Many said that you can fit exactly into those same 4 liters. And here it looks like the truth. But we didn't like diesel B7s too much, so there are few reviews from the owners of such cars. It is worth noting that efficiency is a merit not only of motors, but also of DSG robots. From this point of view, the connection turned out to be very successful. Hate number 3, cold. The big problem with the EA111 series engines is their stubborn unwillingness to warm up at idle in cold weather. A typical review of a regularly freezing owner sounds like this: the motor does not heat up at idle, it freezes in traffic jams at -18 and below. Needless to say, that the stove in this mode also does not want to blow hot air. Theoretically, one of the winter problems, the freezing of the windshield, should be solved by its electric heating. But here again, a mistake. It is not very effective, and many note that it normally copes at temperatures up to -5 to 10 degrees, and then it is no longer enough. It remains only to wait for the engine to still warm up. But alas, a very long warm-up. My wife's Kia warms up to 50 degrees, and it's warm in the cabin, but my Aero just starts to move, and the dewback. Yes, waiting for the 1.4 TSI EA111 series to warm up in the cold at idle is practically useless. There is only one way out: wait a few minutes and go, hoping that the situation will get better on the go. In life, everything turns out this way, but this lack brings some suffering. Love number 3, soundproofing. There is nothing special to tell here. Almost everyone is satisfied with the sound insulation, except for very demanding people who for some reason compare the Passat and the E-Class Mercedes. And if there are occasional complaints about the shunk of the wheel arches, then everything is just fine with the sound of the engine. It seems that there is no engine silence. In case of acceleration, the engine starts to confidently pull the car without tension, so that dizzy. At the same time, the sound of the motor is almost inaudible. Interestingly, the second review was written by the owner of a car with a 1.8 TSI engine, 152 horsepower. Perhaps this is due to the peculiarities of his vestibular apparatus. The sounds from the street in the Passat are also almost inaudible. In a word, almost luxury, at least in terms of sound comfort. Hate number 2, DSG. I am sure that these three magic letters D, S, and G were expected by many. We waited. Unfortunately, these trade wins were not lucky with either robots or motors. Especially the first years of production, from 2010 to 2013. Let's talk about motors below, while we return to the boxes. At that time, not everyone knew about robots, and many killed them unconsciously. They drove like classic automatic machines, not including neutral gear at traffic lights and in traffic jams. Therefore, first of all, these boxes died among residents of large cities. Those who didn't drive through traffic jams, didn't do thoughtless chip tuning, and spent a lot of time on the track were more fortunate. Even early robots, especially the 6-speed wet DQ250, served them longer. But the rest often wrote the following: there were 3,500 kilometers on the odometer, the box was already convulsing in traffic jams, drove 74 tons. Clutch replacement 2 times, under warranty. Or even worse, the first symptoms appeared at 17,000, a slight shudder in second gear when accelerating from low speed. Didn't interfere much. At 32,000, it began to strain. I went to the officials. Mechatronics was sentenced. Most often I had to change the clutch on the DQ200. On the boxes of the racers, especially after tuning, there were also breakdowns of the mechanical part of these 7-speed boxes. But the DQ250, as I said, tolerated bullying more calmly. As you know, the Germans were constantly working on the design of these automatic transmissions, so the later DSGs work quite reliably and for a long time. And their repair is already well mastered, and more often it is cheaper than the repair of classic automatic transmissions. But this is now. And then DSG-7 brought people almost to madness. And it's a pity that bringing the robots to mind ended by the time the B7 themselves were already ending their conveyor life. However, there is a suspicion that most of those early DSGs on these machines have already been repaired at least once. So if you have an interest in a used B7, it makes sense to find out when and who repaired the DSG. Perhaps it's not so scary. Love number 2, trunk. Many people write that the Passat B7 is a little boring car. Like, just a big car for a big family. Rides, carries, quiet, stands well on the road, does not bother on trifles, and more is not required of him. The owners, of course, know better, but then I will have to make a separate point about the owner's great love for the Passat trunk. If you evaluate this car as a large, but boring family car, then you can't do without it. And almost everyone writes about it. The trunk is really rather big, 560 liters. But it's not just the volume. Here's a short burst of love shots for the back of the Passat. The trunk is more than large, folding rear seat backs, special niche for long items, hooks for grocery bags. And the cherry on the cake, the family sits comfortably in the cabin, and there is so much space in the trunk that you can put your mother-in-law there with all her suitcases. Enough space. Oh, you are a good man. Separately, it is worth recalling once again about the materials. Plastic is difficult to scratch, so even if you actively use the trunk, it does not look like the floor of a watermelon van. The only drawback noted by the owners is the large depth of the trunk. If you put something against the far wall, you have to climb inside, which is inconvenient. The pants will definitely get dirty on the bumper. But you can come to terms with this. Hate number 1, 1.8 TSI engines of the EA888 series. Here we come to the most interesting. More precisely, to the worst that is in the car. EA888 motors become the undisputed leader of the anti-rating. What's wrong with them? Just 2 quotes. I have up to 100,000, the car ate 1 to 1.5 L/10,000 kilometers, that is, not so much before the replacement. But after 100,000 oil consumption began to increase in progression and reached 1L/500 kilometers, patience came to an end when the consumption became 1 liter per 200 kilometers. I think everything is clear. But some things require clarification. Firstly, a monstrous and massive oil burner is characteristic of motors until 2013. In 2013, EA 888 changed a lot. First of all, the changes affected the piston group. It cannot be said that the problem has gone completely, but it has definitely become much less common. And most importantly, not on such a scale, a liter of oil per 200 kilometers. This, of course, is good, but the 1.8 TSI engine, beloved in Russia, turned out to be a real disaster at one time. And if on short runs he pleased with very good performance, then oil consumption could increase at any moment, and often immediately very much. Repairs were already expensive at that time, 100 to 150,000, depending on the venue and the amount of work. Of course, it was best to make Gen 3 out of it right away, the third generation of EA 888, but not everyone decided on this. And it is a pity that many sold the car as is, with wild oil consumption. I'm not sure that all sellers were so honest that they told about the existence of this problem to buyers. It is interesting that some of the owners were indifferent to the oil burner. Like, a turbo engine always eats oil. The opinion is very erroneous, but, apparently, it was easier to live that way. Such iron people write something like this: 1,000 kilometers of active driving equals 0.5 liters of oil. In my opinion, there is nothing unusual and nothing terrible in this. How to say? EA 111 motors are also not a gift. There were problems with both the oil burner and the early stretching of the timing chain. But there are still fewer complaints about them. But EA 888. If it weren't for the engine with its love to gobble up oil, then the car is magnificent. Love number one, and nothing else. I thought for a long time what to put in the first place in the ranking of reasons to love B7. Dimensions? Trite. Comfort? Doesn't hold up. Noise isolation? Many people praise her, but there are better ones. As a result, after reading, probably, several hundred reviews, and this is not such an easy job for the brain, as it seems, I came to an unexpected conclusion: the trade winds are loved most of all for their trouble-free operation. Precisely in this formulation, because reliability is something else. I'll try to explain in other words. There are practically no reviews on the internet that would say that the Passat B7 has something constantly breaking down. The body is well painted, and even if chips appear, galvanization saves from rust. Chrome sometimes tarnishes, but very rarely. The chassis can tap, but the resource of all parts is very worthy. Sometimes they complain about the algorithm of the rain sensor, but there are no other questions for the electrician. Salon boring, but very comfortable and hardy. If there were no problems with motors and gearboxes, there would definitely be reliability here now. But there are problems with them. True, there is another opinion. Many say that a frequent oil change can save both motors and gearboxes, rather, you can delay their demise, but that's not the point. And everyone comes to the conclusion that neither one nor the other dies silently. As soon as the DSG starts to pull, you need to go for diagnostics, and not wait until it falls apart. If the engine starts to consume oil, you need to take action immediately, and not wait for it to catch a wedge. The car has no other problems. Therefore, most often they say something like this about the Passat: the car is good, but you need to be prepared for such expenses. You still need to look for a stronger car in this category. And there are small nuances, but they are not critical and do not affect the operation of the car as a whole. Small nuances in this review is the replacement of the clutch in the robot. The strange combination of trouble-free operation with rare major breakdowns is quite rare. Few people write like this: awesome device. Honestly, I don't even know what to complain about. As for the DSG7, it's a slippery topic. That is, everything is fine, if not for the motors and gearboxes. Because of this, someone chooses diesel, someone chooses mechanics. and someone just follows the car, not bringing the situation to the limit. And such owners are delighted with the car. It will not get on the road due to a sudden breakdown and will not annoy with frequent failures of everything in a row. Having free 150 to 200,000 rubles at the ready, you can be calm. B7 will take you anywhere, will not stand in the middle of the road just like that, and will not constantly suck money. And it will take you safely and comfortably. It's just wonderful. But here it is necessary to keep 150 to 200,000 at the ready. You never know.